What excites me about aviation the most is all the opportunities within this industry, all the different paths you can take to really find what you love.
I'd say that one thing that excites me about aviation is that it's just such a growing industry and there's so many different things that you can do in it.
We saw an assembly line where you could see the aircraft in different stages, and it's really cool to see how it all comes together.
I think it's just a really good experience to get to learn more about like how planes work, how different design choices affect flight, and really just everything that encapsulates aviation.
The best part about the manufacturing experience was talking to the people behind it all and learning what they do, how they do it, and why.
Don't let anything hold you back. Throughout this, you see multiple people doing multiple different things, and you can do anything they can do as long as you put your heart and mind to it.
It's just been so incredible and such such a rare, once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Good afternoon. Right. Good afternoon. Welcome to Gamma's annual State of the Industry press conference. My name is Andre Castro. I'm the Director of Communications at Gamma. I'd like to quickly go over today's agenda. We will start with the 2022 GA aircraft billings and shipments report. We will then go into some Gamma issue updates, which will be followed by a panel discussion regarding workforce development, and then followed by Q&A. I'd like to now turn the stage over to our next set of presenters, Gamma Chairman and President and CEO of SimCom International, Eric Hinson, and Gamma President and CEO, Pete Bunce.
Thanks, Andre. We were actually going to have a little balloon flying over here because that is the much neglected part of general aviation, is the balloon category. I don't know why everybody's picking on them.
But of course, Mr. Chairman, I do want to emphasize it was the United States Air Force that shot down
Very
those
true.
balloons.
This banter will continue. So on behalf of the Gamma board, I'd like to invite you and welcome you all to the 2022 shipment and billing data, but the 2023 industry press conference. Before I get started, on the shipping and billing data, before we get into that, what I'd like to do is share a little bit of Gamma history with you. So with the Gamma staff, we did a little research, and what we discovered was the first one of these events, it actually took place back in 1974 in New York. At that time, there were 28 total Gamma member companies. Some of those names have been sort of relegated to aviation history. Some of you may know those names like Narco and Edo Air and Garrett Aviation. There are a few, though, that are still with us today. The big three back then were Piper, Cessna, and Beech Aircraft. And of course, our friends at Hartzell Propeller were there as well. So there is some continuity in Gamma membership. You know, if you look back at 1974, it was a pretty tumultuous year. Some of us actually are old enough to remember 1974 and experienced it firsthand. Back then, you know, President Nixon was actually forced to resign that year. There was a rapid increase in consumer prices. At the end of the year, inflation was actually running at 11%. There was an ongoing oil embargo. There were fuel shortages across the country. There were long fuel lines at gas stations. So it was a tough year, a lot of political and economic uncertainty. Oh, by the way, shout out to our friends in France. 1974 was also the first year that the Charles de Gaulle Airport opened. It has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but I thought it was interesting. Anyway, if you look at that, GA actually had a pretty good year in '74. The deliveries were up 4% over 1973. And get this, the total aircraft delivered in 1974, 14,166 aircraft. And the total billings were 910 million. Now, if you take that number and you inflate it to 2023 dollars, that's about the equivalent of 5.5 billion today. Now, if you do the math on that, and you take the 5.5 billion and you divide it by the number of aircraft, the average price of an aircraft in today's dollars in 1974 was just under $400,000. Now, I'm not, you know, not to jump the gun a little bit here, but when we get into the 22 shipment data, and you do that same math, if you take the billings and you divide it by the number of aircraft, the average price of aircraft today is a little over $8 million. So that's a 20-fold increase in the price of aircraft. Now, a lot of that can be explained by mix. The mix back then was predominantly piston aircraft. In fact, a little less than 5% of the aircraft delivered in '74 were turbojet or turboprop aircraft. This year, we're approaching about 50% in terms of jet and turboprop aircraft. But that, in and of itself, that doesn't explain the 20-fold increase in the price. The other significant contributor is the fact that today, we have aircraft that are substantially more capable than the aircraft that were delivered in 1974. We have business jets that can fly nearly halfway around the world. We have aircraft that can cruise at very close to the speed of sound. They can carry significantly more payloads, a higher payload than back in 1974. We have engines that burn, in some cases, are 30 to 50% more efficient than their counterparts back in the early 70s. We have avionics technology that's made aircraft safer, more reliable. I mean, just think about all the different enhancements we've had. Enhanced ground proximity warnings, TCAS, ADS-B, GPS. We've got fly-by-wire systems on business aircraft now. We have envelope protection. We even have aircraft that are capable of landing themselves in the event that the pilot is incapacitated. So all of that innovation occurred over those 40 years. And it occurred because we had a regulatory environment that allowed us to continue to develop and innovate in GA. And it's incredibly important if we want to continue to make safer, more reliable, high-performance airplanes. And also, we want to solve this problem of our dependence on fossil-based fuel. We need to continue to have that kind of environment as we move forward. So it's really important that we have a regulatory authority that provides the correct safety guardrails, but at the same time allows for innovation in our industry. So with that, our 1974 tour is over, and I'll turn to the piston aircraft market. So the overall news on deliveries is very positive this year. We have a lot of good news to share with you. If you look at the deliveries there on the slide, you can see that the shipments were up 8.2%. And if you look at that from really the beginning of the chart all the way in, that's about a 48% increase over that period of time. So we continue to see more and more piston aircraft delivered into the market. The value's up because the mix has changed. There's more complex aircraft, more complex piston aircraft being delivered this year than in the previous year. We're still replacing a big training fleet out there, but there's also lots of new private pilots that are buying piston-powered aircraft. And the average age of the fleet is still 48 years old, so the opportunity for continued growth, I think, in the piston market is pretty good. We have to solve the issue associated with eliminating low-lead fuel. That's certainly a high priority. The Eagle Initiative, this joint effort between FAA and industry, is a good step. But the more we can do to accelerate that, the better off we'll be in terms of certainly the piston aircraft market. So let's turn to the turboprop market. Also, really good news in the turboprop market. You can see there that billings are $2 billion, which are up 15.1%. The shipments are up 10% again, and that's 3 years in a row of increased shipments. What's interesting in the turboprop market is for actually several decades now, we've seen this continued growth of single-engine turboprop aircraft. Companies like Daher and Pilatus and soon Cessna with the Denali, Epic. It's really become sort of the next aircraft for the owner-pilot who's been traditionally, in the past, they go from a single-engine piston to a twin-engine piston. But what we're seeing now is they go from a single-engine piston aircraft to a single-engine turboprop. So a lot of good opportunity, I think, for future growth there as well.
So now let's switch to business jets. My immediate past chairman always drilled into me last year, it's not about the units, it's about the value. How many times, Michael, did you drill it in? Because that's what matters. So although we delivered 2 more units last year, the value is up 4.5%. And when you are delivering $19.8 billion of business jet aircraft, that's pretty remarkable. Also something that's changed, we started reporting on the market share, the global distribution of that share back in 2007. And this is the highest percentage we have had ever from the U.S. contribution. So if you look, 69.9% of those business jet aircraft are going to the U.S., into the U.S. market, or North America, so that does include Canada. The European share has shrunk from 11.8%, or down from 18% to 11.8% now, and the Asian Pacific share of that market has grown. But if you look at the segments, which is something that people are always looking at, if it's the mids that are carrying the load there on the business jet side. And again, it's no surprise that the market share in the U.S. is what it is because we have the infrastructure here to be able to let those aircraft do their missions and do it extremely well, and we'll touch on that here in a second. If we turn to rotorcraft for a second and look at piston rotorcraft, good year for pistons, so overall increase of about 7.2%. If you look at the 88 million in piston helicopter billings and everything, we saw a 9.9% increase. But one thing to add on to my chairman's comments about the Eagle Initiative, a lot of people lose the fact that these piston rotorcraft need also a 100 unleaded solution for their avgas, and that becomes a very important component of what we're trying to do to be able to service this fleet and transition to an unleaded avgas capability. If we look now over into the turbine helicopters, another good year. Okay, shipments increased 7.6%, and if you look at billings, we're up about 4.4%, and as a reminder, we have that shaded area in there. Leonardo reports their 4th quarter after this press conference takes place in March, so to make the apples comparison, we shade that for you, and we'll have that report from Leonardo here in just a few weeks. Back to you.
Yeah, turning it over to the avionics market report. The Aircraft Electronics Association just reported actually earlier this week, and you can see the sales exceeded 2.8 billion. That is a 21% increase in total sales compared to 21. The retrofit market accounted for 48% of those sales. What's interesting about this market is, as you all recall, we had the mandates for ADS-B, and everybody thought that we'd have this, eventually a slowdown on avionics retrofit and all of that just because we've met the mandate and we're past it. But what's really remarkable is just how robust and healthy this market has been and continues to be really strong. I'd like to congratulate AEA President and CEO Mike Adamson here.
Right over here.
There he is. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for showing up. All right.
So that completes our market report. And now we'd like to transition into just some of the issues that we have facing our industry. And as anybody that picks up a paper any day knows that we've got a number of them. But one thing that struck me the other day as I was heading toward Capitol Hill with our great government affairs team, and I looked out and I'm looking at the refurbishment of the downtown NASM, and I go, what other mode of transportation has not one but two museums in the Smithsonian structure? That is how important aerospace is to the fabric of U.S. societies. And, oh, by the way, it is the most visited museum out of the whole Smithsonian complex. It shouldn't be lost on anybody about how important this sector is. And what we want to do is talk about just some of the things that happen in this sector as we go and improve the life of people on this planet.
Okay, so specifically general aviation, as Pete mentioned, transportation and specifically aviation broadly is an integral part of how modern economies operate. It's absolutely essential. Recently, though, we've had environmentalists, particularly in Europe, who have singled out general aviation because of its impact on the climate. And I think the reason that they single it out is because they perceive that only a few people, a few relatively wealthy elite people benefit from it. But that's really an incomplete picture of GA. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure we communicate that, make sure people understand that GA is much, much broader than just moving people from point A to point B. Sure, we do that. And in many cases, we're doing it to airports that aren't served by scheduled service. But there are so many other things that GA does. I mean, we have an air ambulance market. Just in the United States alone, there are somewhere between about 1,500 fixed-wing and rotary and quick aircraft that are involved in air ambulance. Of course, there's firefighting. We do pilot training, agriculture. There are humanitarian efforts like CAN and Veterans Veterans Airlift Command. We have a large fleet of basically general aviation aircraft that are providing cargo and logistics operations to remote places, not only in the United States, but all over the world. And that's all essential services that are provided by GA. So to simply look at GA and say it's not an essential part of the transportation system, again, is not sharing really the full picture, what's all the benefits associated with it. So I really do think it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we communicate that to decision makers so they understand truly what the importance is of aviation.
And how our supply chains are interlinked. Because if we go and we attack business aviation, every single one of these other modes that are providing services out there, whether we're doing firefighting or EMS, will be negatively impacted by that reduction in the supply chain. Just as our business jet supply chain is very tied to our commercial brethren. We are one big ecosystem that depends on one another.
Yeah, I mean, the other way to look at general aviation is it's really a connectivity tool, if you want to jump to the next slide. We connect people, we connect product, and we connect services. And in order to really try to understand just the magnitude of general aviation, I wish we could do it globally, but we focused just on the United States because we had the data for it. So I asked our friends at FlightAware, so thank you, Mark, and thank you, Daniel, if you're here. And what we did is we took the data for just the first 10 days in February, and we looked at all the ADS-B traffic, and they can get it at a very granular level, and they separated it out, and they can show, based on the aircraft type, what is commercial and what is GA traffic. And so over those first 10 days, and by the way, that data does not include helicopter data, because that's, there's too much scatter and noise in that, so it's hard to get the real data there. So the number I'm about to give you is actually understating just how much activity there is. But anyway, the average over those 10 days was 45,000 daily flights, or GA flights, in the United States, and that includes both Alaska and Hawaii. And of those 45,000 average flights per day, on average, go to about 5,000 different airports. 5,000 different airports. And in the U.S. right now, and Pete will talk to this in just a second, scheduled service only goes to about less than 400 aircraft in the United States. So this sort of highlights one of the other important aspects of general aviation. If you live in rural communities, general aviation provides this really timely connection to the rest of the world. There isn't any other vehicle that allows you to do that.
So if we look at where our commercial brethren are being able to provide service, and we look at the U.S., there's about 143 large to medium-sized airports that are represented here on the map. But what has happened over the last few years, looking at pre-pandemic to now, is look at the difference. We have 324 airports out, U.S. airports, that have lost, basically 76% of those airports have lost service, and the average loss is about 31%. It's also significant to note that of those 324, 60 of them have lost over half their service, and then very starkly, 14 of them have no service left at all. So who has to pick up the slack? Well, that's what our industry is doing, and general aviation is doing it very efficiently with our network of airports out there. And these blue dots are representative of just the 4,500 public use airports. Now think about what our infrastructure looks like when you add the private airports to that map of 14,800 private airports. It should be not lost on anyone that this is an aviation nation, and it is general and business aviation that make commerce happen and make people's lives better. But one thing that we often don't talk about is that it is general and business aviation that is the technology and sustainability incubator for all of aerospace. And how do we do that? Well, a lot of focus is happening on electrics these days, but it's much more than that. Let's take a look at a few of these technologies, but first of all, let's look at the pace of development. So if we look at our commercial brethren, and you look at introduction of new products on a timeline of this century, that's what it looks like from the three great companies that produce our airliners out there for the planet, actually for when you include ATR on the turboprop side. And you see their development is pretty well spread out through these 2 decades in this century. Now let's go to what business aviation looks like. Look at all the companies, look at all the product development, and more importantly, look at what has happened after about 2015. The pace is increasing. This is safety enhancing technology, but also our efficiency is going up dramatically in all of these new products that are being developed. So what kind of technologies are we talking about? Well, if we go and look, we are talking advanced structures out there. We're doing additive manufacturing. We're reducing the number of parts. We've got Ironbirds out there that are really helping us with the digital transformation of all of these aircraft. We're looking at, as we look at new wings out there, obviously winglets, active winglets that we have out there that are really increasing fuel efficiency. We look at all the engine technology that's coming on board, whether you're looking at ways that we are working on the exhaust and doing different mixing technology there. We're looking at different revolutionary ways, whether we're looking at a geared type of turbofan or we're looking at health monitoring systems that are on engines that have a fuel efficiency leaps that you get blown away with their capability. And at the same time, every single one of our engine manufacturers are taking a look at SAF using 100% blend of the neat additive to be able to run those engines on SAF, preparing for our future. We do weight reductions through multiple means, whether it's fly-by-wire, getting rid of the hydraulics there, using less parts, using composites out there, and now we're just starting to scratch the surface on electrical augmentation that will be able to increase our thrust capability across the board on all of our aircraft. And why is this so important? Well, if you look at our commitment to the business aviation, commitment to climate change, and you look at this sand chart that you've all seen over the last several years, we all know that SAF plays such a critical role, and it's absolutely imperative that we get there. But the one thing I really want you to take note of is what happens to that technology wedge. The only way we're going to get to net zero is to work this technology wedge hard. And if we look at that technology wedge in a little more detail, if you look at where that starts to blossom out, it's right at the beginning of the next decade, the 2030s. Now, if you look at how long it takes us to certify an aircraft, we were just talking in a meeting earlier this morning, our engine companies, it's over a decade to be able to certify a new engine. We have to be doing this now, and we have to have the regulatory processes in place, the right people trained to be able to go and allow us to do the development, and it's just accelerating. You saw the sheet or the slide that showed how many new products are coming on board. That is truly accelerating, and our whole effort now is looking and working with the global authorities to allow them to help us to provide incentives for training, to be able to have processes that we use in our factories in basically program management to be able to go and keep pace with what we are actually throwing at them.
And, just to kind of drive home that point about technology, driving fuel efficiency, and I could use, there's a number of new aircraft out there that we could use as an example, but just to use one, if you take the Gulfstream G500, which has incorporated a lot of the technology that Pete shared on that previous slide, and you compare it to a G4 SP, and you put it on a same trip if you fly it from, say, Los Angeles to New York, the G500, even though it's a bigger aircraft, is going to burn 34% less fuel than a G4 SP. That's 34% less emissions, and obviously a much, much more efficient aircraft. So clearly, technology plays a really big role. It already has, and it will continue to do so. So speaking about technology and the challenges of getting that, we look at FAA reauthorization as an opportunity to address some issues where we see them. So, for most of the FAA's existence, general aviation has had a pretty good partnership with the FAA, and it's facilitated a lot of growth and innovation, as I alluded to at the beginning. But recently, the FAA has really, really struggled to provide timely and effective guidance and oversight to our industry. And so that's been a real challenge, and sort of there's like 3 areas really that we see some major challenges. And so within FAA reauthorization, we're going to want to focus on seeing if we can fix some of those issues. The first is on reforming policy guidance and rulemaking. So the short way of describing this is basically a lot goes in and very little comes out in the way of rulemaking, policy, and guidance. It's just kind of goes into a black hole right now, and it's very difficult for us as industry to see where the process is bogging down. So we're looking for some help there. The other one is all these different issues that have sort of conspired to create issues within the FAA include the fact that they've had a fairly significant exodus of experienced technical personnel at the FAA. Now, a lot of them retired. Some of them have been hired. Some have been hired by some of you. But the fact is that it's a pretty new workforce, and it's really important that that workforce be trained to understand the technology of today. Decades ago, the FAA and industry worked very closely to ensure that the FAA understood industry's needs and vice versa. And so we want to make sure that we get back to that kind of engagement with the FAA. Those three things actually need to happen because we absolutely have to streamline this regulatory process and get it back to where it functioned prior to this so that we can continue to build on the future with respect to sustainability. And so sustainability is one of our asks, but we can't do that unless we fix the first three first and fix that regulatory process. And of course, we can't do any of it if we don't have the people in our workforce to do the job. And so that's another focus for reauthorization.
And of course, we're a global industry. So it's not just obviously the FAA, it's working with all the global authorities. And if you take a look at our priorities in Europe, and obviously Europe, a lot of the news has not been good as far as the approach to business aviation over there. Having an availability for SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, becomes very important. But unfortunately, the deployment strategy that is coming forward in Europe does not allow us access at business aviation airports to the sustainable aviation fuel. And what is happening is a large amount of taxes are going to be levied on our industry because we aren't using SAF. So in my mind, we are really between a rock and a hard place there if we can't get it, and then we're going to be taxed heavily because we can't get it. So we're working those issues. Book and claim for us still becomes a very important tool in Europe to be able to allow business aviation to have access to SAF. We're accelerating our development of zero-emission aircraft out there. A lot of you have seen rules that have been put forward up in the Scandinavian countries of where their objective is to have no fossil burning aircraft toward the end of the decade, but also being able to harmonize the rulemaking that we have between the authorities. And obviously, validation is our lifeblood. So we have to continue, just as emphasizing with the FAA, the importance of making good use of the bilateral safety agreements between countries. We have to leverage those because the amount of business that we're throwing at all the authorities won't allow them to keep up unless they properly leverage those bilaterals. One of the things that we obviously have to wrestle with on a global scale is not only our workforce, but the workforce that we have with our regulators. And we are extremely proud of the folks that we have on board, but none of us are shying away from the challenges that we have in front of us to be able to build our workforce of tomorrow.
Yeah, and workforce, and it's a unique and it's a real challenge right now, not just for us, but everybody who's in aerospace or pretty much any technical field. But I think, we have a pretty compelling message for anybody who might be considering, general aviation as a career. I mean, I think there are a few industries right now that are as dynamic and as forward-looking as general aviation is right now. And I can't think of actually a better time to be in general aviation than right now. Maybe when Orville and Wilbur first started flying, but yeah, this is probably the second best time. But anyway, it's really truly a dynamic market right now. We go through these sort of step changes in technology in aircraft, right? And if you go back to the days when aircraft were made out of wood and fabric, and all of a sudden somebody had a great idea to make them out of metal, and that was a pretty big step change, and we saw big advancements. And then there was pressurization, and all of a sudden we could fly over weather. Again, another big step change. Whittle came along. We did a jet engine, and we could increase the speeds of aircraft. And you see how it goes. We went eventually to modern avionics, to composites, and a variety of other significant steps that were taken on the technology sort of treadmill. And now I think we're on the precipice of one of those significant changes again. I mean, if you look at the amount of capital that this industry has attracted and is committed to it over the next 10 to 15 years, it's quite remarkable. We have, of course, the advanced air mobility. We have hydrogen propulsion. We have electric propulsion. We have autonomous aircraft. People want to create aircraft that can fly autonomously. We've got drones. And all of this is building sort of it's the building blocks essentially of the next generation of general aviation. And really, who would not want to be a part of that? Pretty exciting times. So I think the next 20 years, we'll see more innovation, more new technology, more platforms than we probably have in the last 20 years. So with that, I would like to bring some of our young, talented people up here. So Maria de la Posta, if you could come up. Maria's going to moderate a panel, and we decided this year that we'd have a few of the people who have decided to pursue careers in general aviation join us.
Thank you, Eric, for including me in that young talent category.
Yes, absolutely.
Very, very nice of you. I couldn't agree with Eric more. It is definitely a really exciting time to be in aviation. Yes, you know, we talk a fair amount about the challenges, including the workforce challenges, but what an exciting time. And thanks to you and Pete for sharing that really compelling story. I think you're right. We do need to complete the story. I think too much of what's out there doesn't shine the light on what this industry has contributed to humanity and what it's capable of. So I think we have a brilliant opportunity. You know, it's a privilege for me to be here with the current generation of exceptional leaders and talent that are in our industry today and that are going to lead the way into the future. And it's a privilege because I think that, you know, they'll help us also find a way to attract more people to our industry and really show what our industry can bring to anyone. You know, we seem to think sometimes that aerospace is unobtainium. You know, unless you're a rocket scientist, there's not a place for you in this industry. And you'll see today that that couldn't be further from the truth. So let me start by asking each one of you to introduce yourselves. Rosalie.
Sure. Thank you, Maria. My name is Rosalie Argot-Singer. I'm Director of Flight Safety and Security at Textron Aviation.
My name is Brendan Freely. I work for GE Aerospace on the hybrid electric development.
Hi, my name is Gabriela Romano. I'm the Program Manager for the Lear 31 and 35 in SimCom International.
Hi, my name is Emma Rasmussen, and I'm an intern in the Air Safety Department at Cirrus Aircraft, and I'm currently a graduate student at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Prescott, Arizona.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kate Brancard. I'm the European Manager for Operations and Safety with Gamma.
So you heard from Pete and Eric just the really positive progress in our industry from a volume and dollars perspective. You know, you saw the numbers firsthand. It's really been a really great time. But at the same time, when we ask our member companies, you know, how are you doing in terms of open positions or workforce, there's not a single company that doesn't speak to the big gap that we have to secure and retain talent. At the same time, when you read many of the studies, whether McKinsey or others, you know, they talk about the shortage of women and other diverse groups in their midst at all levels of organizations. So, you know, I'd like to maybe start by asking each of you to describe what attracted you to this industry, and you know, how do you feel about you know, your position today? And yeah, go ahead, start.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Wichita, Kansas, a place where you cannot escape aviation even if you wanted to. But really, it was my grandfather that introduced me to aviation. He owned a 1976 182. That really sparked my interest in flying. From there, went to Kansas State and went through their flight program, and eventually was hired on with Cessna at the time in 2004 when we first started putting Garmin G1000 in our piston aircraft. So I trained folks as they came and took delivery. But since then, I've been a demo pilot, flying our turbine aircraft, our jets, all over the world. I led our communications team for a couple of years. Most recently, I led an aftermarket sales team in Singapore, and then now I've come back really into the fold with flight operations in the safety role.
Very cool. Brendan.
Yeah, I might be a little bit of a black sheep here, but I didn't get interested in the aviation industry until college, actually. And a lot of that was exposure through classwork, right? And you start to see how cool the problems that aviation has to solve are, right? I mean, it has to be perfect. We take safety very, very seriously, but we also push components and technologies to their absolute limits. So my background was in electrification. That's a lot of what I did in college. And that's actually what brought me to GE Aerospace, where, like I mentioned, I work on the hybrid electric program now, developing those components to go into future aircraft. So I think that the things that are happening in the industry are incredible and extremely interesting, but I think that to some degree, at least right now, they're a little bit hidden from the public.
Possibly, yeah. Emma, sorry, my mistake. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
so I got into aviation kind of late as well. After high school, I wasn't really exactly sure where I wanted to go with my career. And so I loved traveling, going to different cities, going to different countries. It was just so fun for me. And so I started thinking, well, what's a way that I could make this into my life? And so I met somebody who had a grandchild who went to Embry-Riddle, and I went down there. I did a discovery flight. I was like, wow, this is awesome. So I went there to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. I started teaching as an instructor when I was 19, and ever since then I was just flying 135, and then just recently I've been hired at SimCom to be the program manager there for the Lear program, and it's been great what we've been able to do.
That's amazing. Emma.
So I'm a bit of an unusual story. I didn't grow up around aviation. I didn't have immediate family in the aviation industry. I just noticed my brother playing with Matchbox airplanes one day, and I thought, hey, that looks pretty cool. And so I started fighting with him over the airplanes, and then my parents had enough of the bloodshed, so they went and bought me my own toy airplanes. And among the first of my toy airplanes was a toy Concorde. And for the last 14 years, this airplane has had my heart. It's my favorite airplane. And it has been my biggest source of inspiration for entering this industry. Now, almost 23 years old, I work for Cirrus Aircraft in their air safety department. Halfway through my college experience, I developed an interest in aviation safety and pursued our minor of study in the subject. And one of my professors, Bill Waldock, he's a fairly prominent name in general aviation accident investigation, just totally captivated me. And I decided, that's it, I want to be an air accident investigator. And here I am today pursuing a graduate degree in safety science, continuing my education with Embry-Riddle.
Pretty impressive. Kate.
Well, I'm the classic pattern. I was very lucky to, I am still very lucky to have a dad with wings. So since a very young age, he would take me in the aircraft, and I'm lucky he had wings, but also I'm lucky that he strongly believed that his daughter could be in the aviation sector, and that says a lot about the role of men to include women or to include diversity in our sector. My dad definitely was one of them. So at one point I wanted to fly that aircraft myself. As of today, I'm a pilot, but still when we fly together, he's flying. But that's a thing between us. But I do have a look at what he's doing. So I did that, and then I was a very bad student at school. I was definitely bad in math. I was bad at everything. I was bored in school. And so I worked hard, but I never thought I could be a pilot. I never thought someone like me could be a pilot. So I did journalism because that was a good option. I worked for about 6 months in journalism, and I hated it, every single second of it. So I was like, okay, we need to find something that I will enjoy. So of course, aviation looped back in my professional life, and I started working for the biggest flight school in Belgium. I did communication just to understand what was my purpose in my career. And then I consider myself very lucky. I started working 4 years and a half ago for Gamma. And I am very proud now to work with an amazing team to support and promote general aviation in Europe, but also globally. And I get to fly a lot. I get to meet people with the same passion, and I hope to continue to grow in that industry.
So, Eric, you mentioned that we may be on the cusp of sort of that next 100 years of, and I would say that we are in good hands. I'm so impressed, and I think what really, resonates for me that, you're all, I want to use the word different, but, that's the beauty of it. You all came from different paths in life, and all led you to this wonderful industry. But the reality is that, we're talking to the choir, right? We love it and so on and so forth. But what are some of the perceptions that you think that are out there? Eric and Pete talked about some of them, but in your view, what are some of those perceptions that, what's the word on the street, so to speak? I'd like to start with you, Brendan, maybe.
Sure. Yeah, I think that at least to some people, the aviation industry might seem a little bit stagnant, right? From the outside to the average person, an aircraft looks the same as it has for a long time, right? And it gets them from point A to point B, and they don't see the pain at the pump, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't fill up the aircraft. And so all of the advancements that we've made under the hood, to some degree, I don't think that the public is exposed to that, right? And I think that that's going to change here very quickly. At GE, we think that the future of flight is more electric. And I think that that's going to be a very disruptive technology along with, SAFs and potentially open rotor designs, right? All sorts of things that I think will become a lot more clear to the public that aircraft are changing, right? And I think that that will bring people's attention and people's interest into the industry because they'll start to associate it with a technology that is rapidly advancing, right?
By the way, I should have said this at the get-go, but your mandate is only beginning today, right? Because we had an extensive discussion this morning in one of our board meetings talking about how our messages, are they reaching the public? Along the lines of what you said. Mm-hmm. By the way, there are also hundreds of thousands of airplanes in service. So, as hybrid electric and other different looking vehicles come into the industry, we're still going to have lots of airplanes that look like the classical airplanes. So we need to make sure that the public understands the goodness in all of it. So, and at least 2 of you have communications touch points. So we're going to be able to pull on you to help us with that mandate. Gabby, tell us what, just building on that notion of some of the perceptions that you've heard about our industry and what could we do about it?
Yeah, I've definitely heard similar things as you. I think the biggest thing is a lot of people don't really have a complete understanding of what business aviation and what general aviation really is. And because of that lack of awareness and lack of knowledge, like when you're a flight student, maybe you have 100 hours and you say, hey, I just got my commercial pilot license. They're like, oh my gosh, so you can go fly for the airlines now? So there's just so much lack of awareness and lack of knowledge of the process and what general aviation even is and how to become a part of it. So I think that most of the time when I try to explain my career or the industry to others who don't necessarily have friends or family in the industry, it's kind of a learning curve for them. So there's a little bit of a lack of knowledge there.
So building on that, Kate, and especially what we've seen most recently in Europe, like what are the similarities or differences that, again, us as an industry, we need to understand better to help us turn this perception around, which couldn't be further from the truth.
So I could definitely talk for hours about how general aviation is hurt in Europe. But I do want to maintain the positive thing. And I have to be an optimistic person. And I think the what I call the third generation of aviation or generation, like we are in aviation because we have that passion. So every time you hear someone that, I don't know if I want to work in aviation because it's not sustainable, or if you hear someone that believes that it's bad for the environment and it's bad for, we should do other careers, I'm very proud to be part of this panel because I think we have that passion for aviation that makes us stay in that industry, but also makes us believe that we can make it sustainable. We're not just here for the economy, for the careers. No, we're here because we love aviation. And we strongly believe that we can make it sustainable. So it might take a few years. I'm okay with that, but we do have to keep that belief, and I think that's the work we've been doing in Europe.
So when you post our picture on your Instagram account this evening, what's the caption going to be that your friends in Europe are you're going to be happy with? Like, what are you going to tell them?
Oh, goodness. Do I want to take that responsibility? Sure.
Well, that's what we all have to do. That's a task for everybody in this room. We'll see what you post tonight, yeah?
Agree.
Yeah, I think we should be proud, right? Like you said, and somehow, maybe folks don't understand that in the same way that we do. you know, just again, talking a little bit more about some of these perceptions and things like that. As I mentioned earlier, you know, the number of women in our industry, you know, is nowhere near the 50% of the population that we represent. And then when you look at it in terms of, you know, different parts of organizations, it gets even thinner as you get closer to the top. So what are some of those barriers, not just for women, but I mean, let's start with that and then we can talk about others. Rosalie, what do you think?
Yeah, I think representation absolutely matters. We're in a bit of a chicken and the egg situation right now, but the future workforce needs to be able to see, that diverse workforce needs to be able to see themselves in roles across the industry. That gives them the context to understand that they too can be a part of all of this. We see in the commercial world, airlines, for example, are setting very specific targets for the diversity of their workforce that they're looking to attract. And I think it's going to take that level of intention to get us where we need to be, to showcase ourselves as welcoming and diverse. And to your point, we're not in a position where we can alienate 50% of the population, especially in today's environment. So presenting ourselves as inclusive means having everyone represented at the table.
I do think representation is very important. I think a big part of why I'm sitting here is because as a child, people took an interest in me. They didn't make it about whether I wanted, something pink or blue. It was just, getting a job done kind of thing. We were talking earlier about how the pool doesn't naturally fill itself, right? And I know myself, I often get questions around establishing targets, as if by putting a target, you would put a less qualified woman than man. How do you reconcile that?
I don't believe those two things are synonymous, that by setting a target, you're lowering the bar. Honestly, I think we all have to come to terms with the fact that it's comforting for all of us to surround ourselves with people like us, who may even think the same, may even have the same opinions. And so we've got to kind of break out of that comfort zone and be bringing people into the fold that have a different perspective, that might challenge us a little bit. And that's going to drive all the innovation that we're seeking to achieve.
Yeah. Listening to a speaker once, I learned that, we all have biases. When we say I'm not biased, I think everyone has biases. And actually, there's a physiological component to it. The brain actually uses bias as a shortcut, and familiarity is the easiest way for the brain to make decisions. You're making millions of decisions a minute, so the brain says, well, this one sounds like me, this is the easiest path to go down. And I think for mundane decisions, that's fine, but when you're filling a job posting, you should make your brain work for it and force yourself to. And the outcome is what it is, but at least force yourself. Emma, what are your thoughts on that? What are the barriers, some of the things that have maybe gotten in your way or others?
I think the biggest thing for me was the lack of clarity on the diversity of jobs available in the aviation industry. I grew up watching the air accident investigation shows, seeing Greg Feith on TV, seeing him giving his perspective on shows regarding accidents he worked. And I didn't really think this was something that I could also do. I thought growing up, you were either an engineer or you were a pilot. I didn't realize that there are so many different things in between that you can do in the aviation industry. I got so many friends from undergrad just off doing different things in the industry. Some of them are network planning analysts for airlines, for example. There are just so many things you can do in this industry that are not clearly advertised. I actually spent my first semester at Embry-Riddle in undergrad as an engineer because I felt like that was my only option. And after a semester of realizing, wow, I really hate this, I learned that there's so much more to the industry than what is being shown to us. And I think it is really important to showcase just the different things you can do. I never thought air accident investigation was the path that I wanted to take as a child or even just a few years ago.
That's a pretty specialized area, you're right. I know, Gabby, what do you think about how we might attract people, or what could we do to make these jobs more known to people?
Yeah, I think like we've been saying, there's just such a lack of awareness of the possibilities of all the different options that there can be. And I think like we've said, if you don't have, a family member or a neighbor or a friend who's directly in the aviation industry who can help guide you, I think it's really hard to get your grip on it and really see, okay, this is achievable for me. So I think that being able to introduce general aviation or aviation in general to high school students or even younger, outreach like that, I think it would open up a lot of doors, because I feel like a lot of students or younger people just don't even know that it's even an option.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another important message to all of us and as leaders in our own businesses. What can we do to appeal on many levels to different people and help them navigate all this complexity? I'd like to move to the topic of sustainability. And we mentioned earlier how, again, this is probably a very transformative time in our industry with so many new technologies coming in. And Brendan, you're in the thick of things. I mean, hybrid electric, that's pretty cool, pretty transformative. We can compare notes later. Anyway. But if you're not in the hybrid electric, and if you're not in the middle of like that high-tech part of sustainability, how do you describe to other folks who, maybe in the, hundreds of thousands of jobs that make all those dots on the map, pretty impressive, by the way, possible, without making only about hybrid electric? How do you draw on these people?
Yeah, and I do tend to think about things as an engineer, right? That's how I see the industry primarily, but it's important to remember that it's made up, like you say, right, of all sorts of different positions that are equally important to the way we operate. And how do you send that message? I think that, it's easy to see it from a commercial standpoint, right? You go to an airport and you see 100 people working different jobs, right? And you understand that they all have a role. There are people in the air traffic controller towers. I think the important part for general aviation is to show that we are as big of an important part of the industry as that commercial sector is, and that we need all those positions as well. And that those positions take an even broader spectrum of types of jobs, right? We have firefighters who fly planes, right? We have all kinds of different applications for these smaller general aircraft that I think, should be attracting a really broad diversity of thought and people who are interested in the different types of applications that we use them for, from farming to fires to everything else. So I think it really is getting involved with people earlier and helping them understand that general aviation is part of what makes our entire economy work.
So, I mean, for you, is the future, if you think about all the nationalistic efforts going on around the world, or the desire to localize everything, and do you think the future is, favorable for aviation, or how do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the future has to be favorable for aviation. I mean, to be favorable for humanity. I think that at some point, arguments have to cease. And we have to understand that there are certain things that are immutable. And we've built an economy and a globalized world that has given us many benefits, right? But it would be impossible without the aviation industry. And I think that we have shown many times, I mean, I spent this morning in the Air and Space Museum, that we can undertake incredible technological challenges and invent things that years ago we would have said are impossible to solve these problems. So, it seems like a big challenge, right? Whether you're looking at it from a political aspect and a public opinion aspect, or if you're looking at it from a technology aspect, every problem has a solution.
I think the other area, I think that's very, very much an element of the future. We talk about the technology and the products themselves, but there's also the ecosystem, things like analytics. And I know, Rosalie, maybe you have some ideas on that.
Yeah, I think data analytics specifically are going to be, I feel like as an industry, we're just starting to see the power of data and just starting to harness that. We're measuring things that we weren't able to quantify in the past. We're finding new ways to measure data, and we're finding new use cases for data. I think it's going to drive general business strategy. It's driving safety. You know, we think about flight data monitoring is now trickling down from the airlines into business aviation and really up even from training organizations, maintenance diagnostics. And I think it's going to take that next generation of, now we have data scientists. We didn't even know what that was 10 years ago. But they're going to offer a new perspective on what we should be measuring and how to apply that data to better our business.
And I think most people come to the workforce now with those skills. You know, they already have those skills, so whatever the role is, they can apply them. So maybe just to sort of bring it to a close, I'd like each of you to think about, you know, you have a younger person, a student. You know, what would you say to them about either, you know, your love of the industry, but more importantly, why they should consider a role in aviation? Let's start with you, Kate.
So to me, there are two audiences, and we should not make one more important than the other. So the first one is, as you said, the young person, the student, where my advice would be reach out. If you have an interest in aviation, I think aviation thrives. I think that's English.
Yeah.
Thrives with passionate people. So if you reach out to someone that inspires you in the aviation sector, oh my goodness, they're gonna be thrilled to be able to talk about their job and their planes and their engines and their. We love talking about what we do. So I think that would be my advice. It's reach out to the person that inspires you, and sometimes one meeting and one email can actually start a career. So that's a fact. And then the other audience that I really want to talk about, and it's going to be 30 seconds, is the industry that is in this room. And I really think it's a responsibility of our industry to think about what is my company doing for the workforce. Because that's our responsibility. What actions, what initiatives, what social media, what is the industry doing to reach out to that workforce and to understand them? And I think that's a huge responsibility that we need to have attack. I don't know what's the word for it.
No, listen, I meant what I said earlier. I think this is the beginning of your mandate. I know you all are so passionate about what you do, and we have to, you know, bring everyone along. How about you, Emma?
I think two of the biggest things for me that have helped me on my journey in the industry as a young woman has been finding internships and finding mentors. I have so many mentors, whether they're retired airline pilots, whether it's the local airport bum that just wants to take me around in his antique airplanes, whether it's a professor. I think finding mentors has been super valuable, has kept me inspired and forward thinking when considering my future in the industry. One of my closest friends and mentors is a former Concorde pilot. We bonded over our shared love of the airplane. And he has been very integral in my development, my personal and professional development over the last 7 years that I've known him. And internships. My internship at Cirrus Aircraft has taken me to new heights that I didn't even know were possible for someone my age. I think Cirrus Aircraft has done an extremely good job cultivating the future of the workforce through their internship program. They have done a lot to invest their time and money into me, and they believe in me, they support me, and I think being an employer, part of the responsibility of retaining talent is making sure that you cultivate that growth and allow your employees, whether they've been in the workforce for 20 years or they're fresh graduates, you have to give them an environment to thrive that makes them want to stay and that makes them believe they have a purpose with your organization.
Like many did for us.
Yeah.
Probably, right? Gabby, how about you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, agreeing with what these ladies are saying, I think the biggest thing is mentorship and not being afraid to ask questions. None of us, when we first entered the aviation industry, knew which path we were going to go down or what these words mean, aviation lingo. We had no idea. And so as a young person who's looking to get a job in aviation, ask all your questions. No question is a stupid question. I think I could speak for all of us, really, where if somebody were to come to us and ask us, like we've already mentioned, what's this? How do I become a pilot? How do I become an engineer? here, we'll tell you.
Yeah.
And we will bring you the people to tell you if we can't. So I think that's really important.
Well, we're going to count on you to help us with that. Brendan.
Yeah, a lot of really good answers, and I echo everything that you all said. And I think that for me, the biggest thing is to try to get, I guess, hands-on experience. I think that aviation is becoming, in some ways, actually more accessible through personal drones and things like this. And I think that's a really good entry point, for younger people to start to get their hands on, you know, rotors and all of the things that, you know, make up an aircraft, and start to see what about that is most interesting to them, right? Because you never know what's going to grab your attention and what is going to excite your passion. So I think that getting involved at, you know, the high school level, college level, whatever, with actual real-world problems and real-world projects will help you both crystallize what it is you're interested in, and also develop those soft skills that you're not going to get in the classroom, right? Teamwork, communication, failing, right? These are skills that you have to learn, but you can't learn them from a book.
Yeah, I think I would encourage young people to define their own core values. Don't wait for an organization to define them for you. Within those core values, I would say continuous learning, continuous improvement. And when you approach your career with that sort of frame, with that sort of mindset, that really takes the blinders off. I think we enter our careers maybe with a very specific path or very specific position in mind. And if we walk kind of in that path, then again, those blinders are on, and we don't recognize all the opportunities that might be surrounding us. So yeah, encouraging the continuous learning, continuous improvement, I think sets the stage for really limitless possibilities.
Well, I hope you agree with me. We couldn't have found a better group of young talent to share your ideas with us, and also cause us to reflect, I hope, on some of the things that we may or may not be doing, whether it's giving our own time as mentors or changing our recruiting practices in our businesses. You know, the industry's made huge commitments towards sustainability and workforce development. I know, you know, many of the member companies, and the kind of training and opportunity that we can give people is second to none. I mean, this is an industry you can work anywhere in the world. It's a global stage. We work on some of the most advanced technologies that then make their way into other parts of the world. We're, you know, very strong ethics, our focus on safety and all these things speak to the caliber of people that is in our industry. So we need to be in a better place to be able to attract people and retain people. We have so much to offer. And you have completely re-energized me and reinforced to me that the future is very bright as it relates to the opportunities, but more importantly, the people in our midst. So thank you for taking the time, and we will be enlisting your support. I know you all have day jobs, but hopefully you can carve out a bit of time to make our industry an even better place to be. So thank you for your time today. Thank you. Awesome. All right.
Okay, time now for our assembled press. Any questions out there from the conference? Yes, sir.
Bill Carey with Aviation Week. Pete, I wonder if you could give us an update on the EAGLE program to transition to unleaded avgas by 2030. And from an EAGLE program perspective, what is your understanding of the FAA Memorandum of Understanding with Santa Clara County as regards to Reed-Hillview Airport? And is the expectation that Reed-Hillview will be the pilot airport of the EAGLE program's effort to demonstrate the transition to unleaded fuel?
If we look at the challenge that we have in front of us, first of all, EAGLE was launched 1 year ago at this press conference. We had Administrator Dixon at the time was with us, and we launched. And my brothers, Ed, Mark Baker, Jack Pelton, all the associations, AAAE, NASAO, just to name a few, are all in this together. We've had incredible support from the FAA team to be able to go ahead and try to build the pillars, because it's a hugely complex problem. Just, you know, we know that there are two pathways out there. We have the PAFI pathway, and we also have the SDC pathway. And GAMI Fuel got the first SDC. Swift is working on the others. We've got two other companies that are in the PAFI program. But that's only one part of the problem. We can find a solution, but then we have to be able to produce it and distribute it at a level that we can go ahead, take the distribution system and make the price acceptable. I mean, the price is not going to be as cheap as avgas right now, but it's got to be acceptable. And if you just produce it one part of the country, just the distribution problem alone starts to drive up costs tremendously. The other part of it is we have standards for fuel out there that's produced by a standards body called ASTM, and we have that for jet fuel. We have that for avgas right now. Without that standard out there and that flag on it, we may not have all producers being able to produce it. So now let's go to the Reed Hillview program. I remember being with Administrator Dixon when we were ready to launch this last year, and he called it like he saw it, and I fully agree with him. A lot of communities are using this issue to close airports, pure and simple. They've been trying to close Reed Hillview for years and years, and when they couldn't do it on noise, they've tried to starve the airport. They take SMO's model, Santa Monica's airport, and they've tried to apply it, and now they're using this issue to try to close that airport. And we've got other communities around the country that are doing the same. Unfortunately, what DOT has done with this MOU is produce a model and encourage other communities to do that before this industry is ready to transition. We're fully committed to transition by the end of 2030. But that MOU is so full of holes, and really, it doesn't have any teeth to it. The MOU that they negotiated with the city basically says, well, you're going to maintain it, and you're going to invest in it. Yeah, right. Watch it. And there's no accountability in there. And oh, by the way, they don't want to take any more money from the federal government, so they're just going to run the clock out like Ed and I have seen in so many other airfields out there. And the strategy that the administration is using in this is flawed from the start. And that is not part of EGLE. There is a disconnect between what they've done on the MOU side and what we're trying to do very cooperatively with great people, not only at FAA, but also at EPA. You can tell I feel passionately about this. Julie?
Get the microphone. So we've had great recovery for the past 3 years and marked an increase in deliveries since the beginning of the pandemic. Do you see this recovery on pace with what you'd anticipate, or are we still seeing headwinds from other factors in the economy?
Mr. Chairman, why don't you start?
I think what's interesting about what we're seeing in terms of growth, as we all who've been around this industry a while know, it can be a pretty cyclical industry. But if you look what happened during the pandemic, demand really wasn't affected. Demand was still out there for business aircraft. And because of the supply chain challenges, the demand just simply couldn't be met. And as we've slowly recovered post-pandemic on the supply chain, it's acting sort of like a governor on the level of activity in terms of aircraft production that we're seeing from our OEMs. And I'm not sure that's necessarily a bad thing, because having lived through a couple of those previous cycles, it would be nice to see one that's a little more moderated. So I think there's still quite a bit of room to go just because of that demand that has still yet to be fulfilled.
And adding to that, Governor, is workforce. We are challenged. Yeah. I think we polled in a conversation just this morning, it looks like about 10% down workforce across the board from our member companies. Virtually every single one of them has a need, especially for technical expertise. But that's not only with our industry. You look at the federal government and you look at what help we need with the regulators to be able to take the volume of work. They're even in a worse situation as far as having, especially engineers. I think the number was out of a 500 workforce,
yeah, it was 10% of the workforce on certification is vacant right now. They have open job recs at FAA to fill those roles. So as we try to accelerate certification with all the great stuff that's coming, it's a real challenge. And we're competing for the same resources.
And that's why the bilateral safety agreements become so important to us, because what we're doing right now is we're checking each other's work. We have these safety agreements between Europe and the US, Europe and Canada, and it's supposed to take each other's safety conferences to say, yes, if the regulations are the same, let's look at other things like what is new and novel. But post-MAX, that's not happening, and we've got to get back to a system where we're taking that type of approach, because otherwise the regulators are going to get further and further behind. Molly? Got her.
Good.
One right here.
Hi, Molly McMillan with Aviation Week. When you talk about getting more of the word out, I guess, about aviation and its benefits to try to counter the negativity that when people are chaining themselves to airplanes and that, the protesters, what is there, I mean, certainly you're preaching to the choir in this room. Is there some kind of a plan, like how do you reach the protester that when you look on Twitter, it's this person flew here and used this amount of, emitted this amount of carbon, and how do you kind of take their arguments down and counter one-on-one, I guess, or, well, what's the big plan?
Well, if there were any silver bullets, we would have done it, and obviously we have the No Plane, No Gain program that we would start to address that, but it's very complex. Can you ever convince them? Michael told us he was at Corporate Jet Investor in London a couple weeks ago, and the protesters all came into the room, and basically Arthur tried to engage with them and say, okay, let's start the conversation with you. What is it you really are against? You know, are you against the aircraft itself, or just that you will never be able to own one or fly in one? What is it? And they don't want to engage there. We're happy to engage with them. It's just, how do we do that? Because we have an incredible story. We are the technology and sustainability incubator, but how do we get through, and are we ever going to convince that segment? Or do we need to do more of what we talked about when we relaunched No Plane, No Gain? And I got together and we said it's really grass tops to be able to go ahead and look at influencers, but there is certainly better ways that we can get to young people to be able to talk about this industry and use all the different platforms that I know nothing about, you know, and we were talking about Instagram, and I hit Monty and go, what's that again? You know, but we can use your help to be able to tell our story. Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are specific things people do. I'm sure probably some of you read, you know, Bill Gates' response when he was told that, you know, he shouldn't be flying around all these conferences, and he specifically said, look, I'm not part of the problem. I buy all these offsets, I invest in, you know, climate all over the world, and I reduce carbon footprint much more than I actually emit. And so there's specific action that people like that can take. But the reality is we're probably never, ever going to convince a climate activist that, you know, that's probably not the people that we should focus on. As I mentioned, I think we really need to focus on ultimately the people who might observe those climate activists, and they're looking at it on a cost basis purely, right? That's the only way they look at that equation. And for somebody who's once removed from it, we just need to make sure that they understand both sides of that equation. It's a cost-benefit analysis. And you got to look at the benefit and the cost. You can't look at just one side of that equation. And by the way, that's true of any transportation system. It's not just GA. I mean, the entire transportation system of the entire world is based on fossil fuel, predominantly. And that's not going to change anytime soon. But I would argue that we in GA are probably more active in terms of trying to find and identify ways to eliminate our dependence than most other industries.
I think we have time for one more. Yes, sir.
Hey, it's Micah from the Wall Street Journal. Have you met with Phil Washington, the White House's nominee, to lead the FAA? And what's your sense of how, if so, his read on, you know, the association's priorities? And do you support, have you guys taken a position on his nomination? Thanks.
Well, I personally have met with Mr. Washington. He impressed me very much. I met with him at the Denver International Airport, and like the man. But from a standpoint, a political standpoint, you know, we live in this rarefied atmosphere of partisan politics within D.C., and you know, we always bat this back and forth. If we don't have universal support for someone coming into that office, is ultimately going to benefit the country. And I still think the issue is on the table for that, because we've heard what comments have been made from whether it's Chairman Graves or whether it's on the Senate side from Senator Cruz, and that we hope that whomever takes over the reins at the FAA, and it is important that we get an administrator in there, because it is acting all the way down right now, and we need some permanent members in there to make sure that there's stability within the organization, but very, very strong leadership. And so I think the position that we all take is we want to get somebody strong into the FAA office, but it's going to be a political decision that the folks on Capitol Hill are going to ultimately make, whether or not Phil is the one that gets through the process. Okay, well, I would very much like to thank you. Now I got to make all my board members work to head on over to our board meeting this afternoon, and then I hope to see many of you tonight at the reception. I would just want to thank my chairman and thank Maria, our chairman of our communications committee, for the great job. Our panelists, boy, you did great work. I'll come work for Gamma if you ever get tired over there.
Absolutely.
Love to have you, but this is, as always, it's just wonderful to get this family back together, and we don't do it enough. So thank you very much.
Appreciate it. No, that's great. Thank you. We got to go.